Scott Williams has a BA in history from Rice University and an MA in history from Penn State University. He's been teaching at Weatherford College since 2006. He teaches online as well as in class, both hybrid and in-class formats. He is also the Assistant Department Chair in charge of assessment for the Social Sciences Department, as well as, busy man, chairs the e-learning advisory committee and is the co-creator of the Weatherford College Learning Community. He was chosen Faculty Member of the Year in 2014 and received the Jack Harvey Exemplary Teaching Award in 2015. Professor Williams.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you for coming. I am going to talk today about teaching. Who we teach, how it affects the way we teach, looking both at national numbers and at Weatherford College numbers in doing this. But before I get too far into it, I want to define a couple of terms. I'm going to start with, it's called equity and gateway courses, so I want to make sure we know what we're talking about here. A gateway course is any course that is an introductory level course that has a high level of enrollment. So in most cases it would be what you would think English, math, history. It also includes, at least at the national level, and this is where sometimes things differ between the national level versus what we teach here at Weatherford College. Some of the other things that often get lumped into gateway courses is psychology, chemistry, biology, and accounting. Because depending on what direction people are going in, those are the courses that they take very often their first year, and that they take a lot. You know, there are a lot of students in these. I am working from the definition that also these gateway courses are courses that you have to pass to be able to move on to something else. For us at Weatherford College, that's usually to get through the core. But these, again, from the national numbers, these would be, that's why biology and chemistry and accounting are included, because quite often those are courses that you got to get to that before you can get to the higher level things to go on and get a business degree, to go on and get an education degree, to go on and get any other engineering for biology and chemistry purposes, things like that. So that's the definitions we're working with on what a gateway course is. Why? The question of why on gateway courses. Yes, I'm going to read some things to you. I know that's always an awkward thing to put the nice big blocks of text up on the screen for this, but I want you to, and this is one of those things, I'm very big into the idea of universal design for learning, and one of the concepts of universal design for learning is that you want to make sure you're presenting information in ways that everybody can get it. And so I was actually in a presentation yesterday where they basically said, I'm going to let you read what's up there and then we're going to talk about it. Well, actual universal design for learning says if I put something up there, I'm supposed to also read it out to you so that you can not have to if you have a problem with reading or anything like that. So I will be reading some text, so I do apologize. I know I don't want this to be a death by PowerPoint presentation, but the scholarship on the subject has shown that students who do not succeed in gateway courses disproportionately come from lower income, first generation, and underrepresented minority groups. They are the students least likely to attempt college, and even when they do attend, are the least likely to complete a degree. Also, their failure in gateway courses is directly correlated with their departure from college. So these are not just gateway courses in that, you know, these are the first courses that students take. They are gateway in, if you don't pass them, you are much less likely to succeed in college. Especially if you have any of these other things where you are not the kind of, what we still have in the United States, this model of everybody is a white middle-class student who goes to school full-time and has no other obligations to do anything else in their lives, and they are just 100% full-time student. We still teach that way today. But the data shows that teaching that way really disadvantages a lot of students who do not fit that category. A lot of the information that I'm getting comes from an institution called the Gardner Institute. The Gardner Institute is a non-profit institute based out of North Carolina. And they did nationwide surveys that become the basis of what I'm going to show you today. So I'm going to compare nationwide data of who fails and succeeds in Gateway courses with Weatherford College data of who fails and succeeds in our Gateway courses. Their data comes from 37 institutions, which include public institutions, private institutions, four-year institutions, two-year institutions, religious institutions. They tried to do a sample across all of these. In the state of Texas, that includes Houston Community College, University of Houston Downtown, Texas Southern University, and Lone Star College. So two of those are community colleges here in the state of Texas. So this is not just here's what four-year universities do, this is what all sorts of different institutions do. And they call their program the Gateways to Completion Project, and it is an evidence-based process to create an institutional plan for improving student learning and success in high enrollment courses that have historically resulted in high rates of D's, F's, withdrawals, and incompletes, especially for low-income, first-generation, and historically underrepresented students. Notice, repeating a lot of the same terminology because this is the focus of this, is on who are these people who are not succeeding. So I'm going to shorten that in what we look at after this to the DFWI rate. They get a D, it doesn't transfer well, or it's usually an indication that you probably are going to have to take that class over again because a lot of programs have you have to get a C or higher in something to be able to go on to the next course. An F, we obviously all know what an F is. Withdrawal means you've dropped out of it in some way, whether that's individual course or from the institution as a whole. And incompletes are included here, and I don't have the data on this, but I would say anecdotally my data is I've yet to have, in my 14 years of teaching here, I've yet to have a student who took an incomplete who ever actually came back and completed their incomplete, which means most of the time students who get an incomplete also end up being essentially not successful in the class as well. So that's why it's the DFWI rate. So I'm going to start with showing you some numbers here. This is the national numbers based off of those 37 institutions. Now I'm going to start with race and ethnicity. This is their chart. This is the Gardner Institute. So this is those 37 institutions that they polled. You can see, depending on the institution, they didn't have all 37 at all the different institutions. But you can also see the number of students that were evaluated in these here. So their definition of Gateway courses are Principles of Accounting, General Biology, General Chemistry, English Composition, the U.S. History Survey, Math Algebra, Math Calculus, and General Psychology. I'm going to look at all these for Weatherford College except for Calculus because for us that's not a Gateway course. Calculus is something that very few people actually take at Weatherford College. That's something they'll take at a four-year university. But otherwise, all these others we teach. So these are, giving you the national numbers here. And the point that was made when I saw this presentation, because I actually saw the presentation by Andrew Koch, who is the head of the Gardner Institute. He came and talked at a conference I did, and I asked him for permission to be able to use these numbers. So this comes from them. And what he wanted to point out is the difference between, this is your average. Every single student in here, this is the average number of students in each of those classes who got a D, F, W, or I. So the average DFWI rate. And then looking across, where do we see groups that are well above that rate? And so this means who are we not serving with the way that we're teaching right now? Because if we're looking at people who are above the rate of the average DFWI rate, that means that in some way we are not reaching those students in the ways that we teach. And so as you can see up here, it does fall very heavily in the African American DFWI rate as being the highest in all but two of the categories, with chemistry being Native American and calculus being Latino Hispanic. But in both the case, well, especially the calculus, we're talking a 0.1% difference there. The only one significantly different is the general chemistry one. And so this is one of the things when I listen to Andrew Koch talk about this is one of the things he really pointed out is that obviously there's something that's going on that we can't just assume that it's something to do with students who are of African American ethnicity. It's not that it's them, it's that we are not reaching those people. We are not reaching people who are in these other groups. And you can, as I'm not going to go through and point out every single number to you. They're the ones who put the red on there just to highlight the ones that are the highest. So, what does that look like at Weatherford College? Weatherford College, this is the 2018-19 academic year, which includes fall of 2018, spring of 2019, and summer of 2019. So that's our academic year. And no, I don't, I had to put all this stuff together, so I don't have the nice, highlight and all that type of stuff. I will say, right off the bat, we are primarily a white institution. After that, we're Latino Hispanic is the growing percentage of it, and from the data that they use, the categories African American, Native American, we have very few Native American students and not a large number of African American students. So, in this case, the data on both of these are not spectacular because you could look at something like 100% failure rate of African American students in college algebra. Looks terrible, but there were 2. So, I mean, how do that's not a significant number to say that there were 2 African American students in college algebra and those 2 failed. Well, that does give you a 100% failure rate, but that doesn't really mean a whole lot. But if we look across, this is the national average. So I just pulled this category, this column over from the Gardner Institute. So this is their numbers of the national average. This is us. So these 4 columns are us. The thing that you can really look at, as I said, I would probably leave these out, but I put the numbers in just so you can see where they are, but I wouldn't look at the African American and Native American as being incredibly significant. But if we compare white to Latino Hispanic, we can still see, these are our 2 largest ethnic groups at Weatherford College, we can see some big differences. If you look at accounting, for example, 28% is the national average for a DFWI. White Caucasian is 25%. Latino Hispanic is 43%. So much higher percentage of people who are not, whereas biology, roughly the same. Chemistry, 19, 20, 22. English, 26, 27, 25. History is interesting. I'm a history professor, so I was always interested in what the history numbers look through here. 23% is the national average for DFWI. 25% for white Caucasian, 21% for white Caucasians, 28% for Hispanics. We do have enough Latino Hispanic in the histories for that to start being a significant number, and it's about 5% higher. And even from the national average, and 7% higher compared to white students here at Weatherford College. So there may be something where you could investigate that as to why might Latino and Hispanic students be doing worse in history than white students. Again, it's also a 1-year thing, so if we looked 5-year, would it look different? I had the data do 1 year. I could have done 5-year, but that would have been a lot more math on my part because I had to make these numbers from the data that came to us, I wasn't given these, so there are my own limitations. Math, 46% is the national average. 48 and 46, that's about the same. 15% is the national average for psychology, 13, 15. So history's really, racially, we're not really all that off from what you would expect. 5%-ish is not a terrible, difference as far as that goes. Again, if you pull in African American, Native American on the raw numbers, I think you can see, especially once you get up into the 30-ish, which really only gets you to English and psychology that have enough to be somewhat statistically significant, there is about a 10% difference between African Americans and English and a 13% difference in psychology. So, there are some things that we could probably come from that, but I would want to pull probably 5 years of data to be able to really say something about how we reach African American students. And again, Native American students, we're just not going to have that number. Now, when I got the numbers from Weatherford College, I also got Asian, I also got multi-ethnic, so we do have those numbers. I didn't put them on here because I'm just comparing straight back to the national numbers, and I don't have national numbers for those groups. Next one, first-generation students and students on financial aid. Now again, number of institutions, number of students across the courses, average DFWI rate, that stays the same, kind of all the way through there for this. Then we look at first generation versus non-first generation on a national standard. So they're first generation student versus non-first generation. Again, this is your average, this is your first gen, this is your non-first gen. You'll notice that in all of these cases, the first generation students have a higher DFWI rate. That's probably not surprising because students who come in who are first generation students come in with significantly more disadvantages on succeeding in college than students who have parents who went to college or have a sibling or other relative who went to college, just because in terminology that I've heard used other places at Weatherford College, they don't know how to do college, as in many cases they don't really know what financial aid is or how financial aid works. They don't understand how to read a textbook, how to even register classes, how to do tests. They don't have the family background to have somebody they can draw on for this. So that's not unexpected for there to be a higher first gen rate versus a non-first gen. We also can look at what they took also is we use the Pell Grant as the national standard for poverty. If you are here on a Pell Grant, that means you are in the area of being by the national standard of being poor, essentially. So if we look at Pell Grant students versus non-Pell Grant students, that's these two categories. We also see that students who come in poor by national standards also have a higher DFWI rate than students who do not have Pell Grants, who are not by the national definition considered to be poor. So again, this is not saying that somebody who is a first generation or somebody who is on a Pell Grant is a poor student. It is saying that we are not reaching those students in the same way that we are reaching students who are not in those categories. So let's look at the Weatherford College. Our number of students, average DFWI rate, that's ours here at Weatherford College right there. So that's how many students, that's the average DFWI rate for us in those classes. And then I've actually arranged this a little bit differently with a little bit more data I was able to get. Largely because you see a trend when you go across here. You start with not on financial aid at all. Students who get no financial aid from Weatherford College. Followed by, and I know this seems weird, the next one would be first generation, but it's because the numbers go up as you do this. No financial aid whatsoever. First generation, on financial aid, but not getting a Pell Grant, meaning they're getting some financial aid, but do not fall under the national definition of poverty, because that's what a Pell Grant is. And then finally, students on a Pell Grant. And again, if you look across there from our average to not on financial aid, which in most cases is either right at or below our average DFWI rate, to first generation, which goes up, to on financial aid, which goes up beyond that, to Pell Grant, which goes up beyond that. So while we look back at the various racial things, and there wasn't a gargantuan difference in most categories, we've got some striking differences in the way we teach students here at Weatherford College based upon who has economic advantage coming into Weatherford College. Because if you look at this, math is of course the most striking. Math is, our average DFWI rate is 46%. So 46% of people who take college algebra get a DFW or I. Down to 41% if you get no financial aid. First generation, 49%. On financial aid of some sort, 54%. Poverty rate, 67%. 67% of people who are the poorest that we have here at Weatherford College will fail college algebra, or fail college algebra in the 2018-2019 school year.
And I think those numbers are low.
This is just, well, it's also, this is the, again, what we're dependent on too is that you've applied for financial aid, that you've gotten the Pell Grant, that you've gone through all of these status, which a lot of times first generation students don't even know how to do some of those processes. And so, we can only do what the numbers tell us. We can't go much further than what the numbers tell us, because I can't go and guess how many more might be, Pell Grant students or anything like that. I can only report out what is reported to us. What I'm leaving out of all these is all of these have categories of unreported. I'm not giving you that because for some students we just don't have data on them at all. So, the data is always limited based upon what data you have. But, I pull out math because that's the most striking of it, but I mean, you look across the board here, and outside of chemistry, which is a very odd outlier in that it actually, more students pass who are at the highest level of federally determined to be poor. Outside of that, it goes up, not as dramatically as math, but it goes up in all of the main gateway subjects that we teach. Gender. Out of curiosity, they had numbers on gender, so we wanted to see what that looked like. I know this is a different chart. I'm pulling from the Gardner Institute. They present information in two different ways. They have the nice table, or they have these charts. They did gender for just 3 of those gateway courses, accounting, chemistry, and history. They are working their way through all of those and basically putting out a report specifically on all of those, and they've basically done 3 so far. So here are the 3 that they have done to this point. And you can see, we're back to the data, look, unreported, we have, there is, to a certain extent, we don't know if people don't report gender, or nowadays if gender gets reported as something that is not male or female, then, we get a larger and larger of that unreported category. But we can look across there at the average DFWI rate nationally, and then female versus male. And as you can see, in all of the categories, more men have a DFWI than women. So let's look at the Weatherford College numbers. Same thing. Here is our average DFWI rate in these classes. Male or female, male. Not spectacular differences. I think we're actually, if you take out biology and psychology, English, those 3 have higher male, and then the others are basically almost even. So we got 3 that are higher male DFWI rates, and then the others are basically flat. That it's basically the same for men and women. And no, I did not include the underreported there or unreported there because I did not get those numbers. So can't tell you what on the people who did not report a gender as to what theirs was. The last one, I don't have a Weatherford College comparison for this last set of data. But this one I thought was really interesting. This is retention basis, and so let me explain this category to you. So again, top is average DFWI rate, the same that we've been looking at all the way through here. The green is retained, meaning a student who returns the next year or the next semester. The blue is students who choose to leave, not saying why or how they choose to leave, but they basically don't come back. They're here in the fall, they don't come back in the spring. They're here in the spring, they don't come back the next fall, whatever it may be. They have chosen to leave, and maybe for reasons outside of their own choice, but they have, they've voluntarily not left. The bottom is the institution requires the student to leave. That's your academic probation. That is your suspensions, and it wouldn't even be parole, it'd be the suspensions more than anything else, or any sort of academic. It could also be by conduct, because there's some institutions that will, you can be asked to remove by conduct. So this is how many students have a DFWI in each of these categories. So if they have a DFWI in a class, the ones who come back next year are the lowest chance of having that DFWI. Sorry, I said it backwards. Of all, if they had a DFWI, the lowest group to have that DFWI are the students who come back the next year. So students who come back next year are least likely to have a DFWI. Notice the blue line is if they get a DFWI in one semester, the chances of not coming back the next semester close to doubles. So this brings that other data before. So if we're talking about these groups where we have higher levels of DFWIs than others, students who get DFWIs in these courses are much more likely to not come back. And the bottom one, of course, the reason it's not 100%, which is what you might expect, if you're kicked out or something like that, is you could be kicked out of a single course, or you could be kicked out because of a single course and still have actually done okay in another course. You don't necessarily have to have gotten a DFWI in every single one of your courses. You could still possibly pass one course, even if you were, sent out or something like that. So that's why it's not 100%, but of course you would expect that number to be very high. If you're kicked out, you probably didn't do well for some reason or another. So this is a question of why, why should we care about it? Because, as I started with, students who get DFWIs do not stay. They do not persist in college. They do not stay and succeed in future semesters. So that's the data section of this. So you've survived the data section here where I'm throwing a whole bunch of numbers. So let me now talk about what this means and what we can do about it. So, how do we fix this? Well, I am relying to a certain extent on the Gardner Institute, although I have my own thoughts on this, but the Gardner Institute, the reason they do this data collection is they then go to institutions and say, would you like to improve? And yes, they want money for institutions that want to improve, but they will basically come in and do a 5-year program with institutions to say, let's improve your success for your students in gateway courses. So they have to have this data to start with so they know how to help you improve your institutions. Their 3 things that they do, and again, they've been doing this across multiple institutions across the U.S., for years now, is they put in place active learning, which is basically not what I'm doing right now, which is me standing in front of a room and talking to you. That is not active learning. This is what we're doing right now is passive learning. Active learning is having your audience, your students involved with you as you're talking. Embedded, i.e. required support for all students. Meaning, if you need to teach your students a skill, you require that the students do something to gain that skill. Because elsewhere in this, and I don't actually have this as a quotation up here, but elsewhere in this, in these studies, one of the things they say is, students don't do optional. And those categories of first generation and poor and underrepresented minorities do less optional even than your standard students. So if something is optional, go to the Writing Center, go to get tutoring, or go to get something like that, and it's optional, the more of those categories that I was just talking about in the data, the less likely those students are to actually do something that is not required. So turning these things into required, I know you teach Spanish. If you have a requirement that they go and do a lab or go and do tutoring versus show up if you feel like you need help. Because students who are first generation are often not comfortable coming into our offices to get help. Versus if you say, you have to go in and get help, they are going to go in and get help and they will generally do better. That's the embedded, i.e. required. And the other thing is early and frequent feedback, including early intervention. Early and frequent means students get things graded fast and they have feedback on the things that are graded that help them succeed on the next assignment in the class. And early intervention, we call them early alerts. They don't have to be in the formal system of early alerts here at Weatherford College, but we can send early alerts to students that basically says, hey, you're not passing. Come and talk to me, or something like that. But early intervention can be within the classroom where you just see, second week into the class, this student hasn't turned in an assignment. You just reach out to them and say, is there something I can help you with? Did you miss this? Did you not understand something? Let's get you going early versus waiting until 10 weeks into the semester to figure out, oh, that student's not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And by 10 weeks in, it may be too late to do anything to help that student. And so, these three things are what they try and do nationally to try and help get the Gateway course failure rate down. And I'm not going to go into the data of how successful they've been, but they've got plenty of data that says they are quite successful at this in 5-year intervention at an institution that every graph I saw did this. Of the DFWI, in all the categories, you just see down, 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 and down by going in. One, telling institutions they have a problem, because most people don't know. And then two, saying, and here's how you fix that problem. And amazingly enough, you have a problem and you try and fix it, and you quite often fix it. So that's what they've been able to do. No, I'm not advocating that Weatherford College become a Gardner Institute school, although I love it. But, I'm not advocating for that, but I'm just saying this is something that's out there. So let me now say this is some of what they say. And yes, I'm back to reading you big blocks of text, so I do apologize. But in some cases, they say it better than I can say it. So, both of these, I teach history, so this came to me. History was the second of the groups that they did the deep dive into. And in fact, those 4 institutions in the state of Texas were part of something actually called the Historian's Gateway Completion Process. So those 4 institutions I pointed out before, Houston Community College, University of Houston Downtown, Texas Southern, and Lone Star College, they all had history-specific intervention. And so I, as a member of the American Historical Association, had access to our side of things, so the history side versus the Gardner Institute. So this is actually coming from the American Historical Association's magazine, Perspectives on History. And the title of it is The History Classroom in an Era of Crisis. So I pulled out a couple of specific things. First, students arrive in our classes with very different levels of preparation, and these often correlate with levels of economic and social advantage. If the race and social background of our students can predict their grades, and if a DFW in an introductory history class is frequently a prelude to academic disaster, then, and I took out a few kind of side remarks there, then ineffective teaching and evaluation strategies can reinforce these divisions, sending a message to the privileged, pre-educated. In this case, we're talking about that standard 4-year. You come out of high school, you go straight to a 4-year university. You live on the dorm. You don't work. You don't have family obligations. You're just there, and you're 100% a student from that point. It sends a message to privileged, pre-educated students that they are worthy, and marginalizes the rest. Unless we can make the rules of the history game available to more students and re-energize those who have lost hope for academic success, the grades we give can be another part of the process of separating haves from have-nots. In other words, if we keep teaching the way that we have always taught, we are basically going to keep saying that what we value is white, middle class, directly out of high school, going to college students, because they're the ones who are going to do the best in the way that we are currently doing it. Closing thoughts. We can't keep doing what we're doing. That's my closing thought. Because what we're doing is not working. I mean, again, at Weatherford College, which is a very, very, very much a majority white institution, the numbers on race don't look incredibly bad because we do largely fit into the group that is the quote unquote norm that we expect a college student is. But that's why I like the financial aid, the poverty data, because that's where it really starts to show that we got something here that is very much a problem, which is that we don't do well for students who don't come in with advantages, especially economic advantages. And that's anecdotally, any of us who teach, there's several of you out there who are faculty, staff here at Weatherford College, we know. I mean, our students are working extra jobs. Their parents, they're taking care of family members. They are doing lots of things that make them not your traditional, 100% full-time college student who doesn't have other obligations. This does not mean giving out A's, because I'm anticipating, hopefully not for many of you in here, but I can anticipate people who would not come and listen to this, that what they would say is, oh, well, then what you want to do is just take somebody who's poor or who's a minority and say, we're just going to give them A's because they had disadvantages, so let's just give them all A's. I mean, that doesn't do anything, because then you're still perpetuating the, you're not teaching them to be better, you're not improving their lives, you are doing what often gets called in high school the, social passing on to the next grade. You're passing them on because you don't want to deal with them anymore, so you just move them up to the next grade, whether they've happened to have made the grade or whatever, in that situation. And so, we want this to be something where we reach out to these students in a way that teaches them, that reaches them and teaches them how to be successful and moves them forward. This is, again, this is one of my closing thoughts, but it comes from an article that I really like, just even the title of it, Teaching the Students We Have, Not the Students We Wish We Had. I like the title. Today's college students, and they are writing in 2018, so I mean this is current, so you're not talking, this is not 1990s or 1970s, this is current. Today's college students are the most overburdened and under-supported in American history. More than 1 in 4 have a child. Almost 3 in 4 are employed. And more than half receive Pell Grants but are left far short of the funds required to pay for college. Rather than receiving help from their parents to pay for college, even the youngest college students often have to use their loans to pay their parents' bills. Whereas previous generations could turn to food stamps for help, today's students have to first work long hours to qualify for the USDA's Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. Similarly, students years ago could quickly talk to an advisor for help, but now, and this is not necessarily true of Weatherford College, but it's certainly 4 years, but now they may be sharing that advisor with more than 500 other students. Kids these days aren't kids at all. But this fact is neglected by many researchers and by too many faculty members who think of their own experiences in college rather than their students when crafting teaching plans. Also from that article, didn't want to have 3 large blocks of text on one slide. As educators, we need to lead the way and design our pedagogical approaches for the students we have, not the students we wish we had. This requires approaches that are responsive, inclusive, adaptive, challenging, and compassionate. And it requires that institutions find more creative ways to support teachers and prepare them for the work of teaching. So let me close out not with reading what other people say, but what I have to say about this. Then I'll open up for comments, questions after that. I was your traditional college student. Graduated high school, valedictorian of my high school, went to a top 20 university at Rice University, spent 4 years there, lived on campus. I did work very, very much part-time, and that was only so I had spending money. It wasn't so I could afford to go to college. I was privileged because I had parents who both had master's degrees. My mom had 2 masters, my dad had 1 master's. They had good, solid middle-class jobs, and we didn't get financial aid because my parents made too much money for us to get financial aid. So, that's definitely where I came from. And then I look at, the way that I was taught, and the way that I was taught is, with the assumption that I walked into the door and I knew everything that was going on. I didn't. I struggled my first year. Even coming out of that, I struggled my first year, and came close to failing out my first year. I was able to recover at the very end of it, but I didn't do well, and that's even me coming from a position of privilege, much less if I had not come from that. And how was I taught? I was taught the way that I'm doing it here. Every class I had was professor standing up at the front and delivering information to you, and as I've seen some people in the audience, the eyes start to glaze over, and you start to think, this person's been talking to me for 42 minutes. It's hard to follow things for that period, that long of a period of time, no matter how engaging of an instructor you are. I go off to graduate school. I spent 8 years in graduate school. In that period of time, I was never once taught how to teach. I had examples of how to teach. I was a teaching assistant for 4 years of the time that I was there, and saw examples of how taught, and then I taught my own classes for 4 years as a graduate instructor. But not a single time in the entirety of my graduate program was I ever in a class or a workshop or somebody sat down and said, here's how you teach. So my model on how to teach was how I saw everybody teaching before me. And that gets perpetuated. I'm not alone in it. That gets perpetuated down through the academy all the way through today. Most of us, when we start out teaching, teach the way that we were taught. And as long as the way that we were taught is in this, what I've been talking about here, and teaching towards white, middle-class, four-year university students who don't have other obligations, which is where most of us who are teaching, a lot of us came from that, pathway. Especially, not even necessarily among community college faculty as much, but especially if you get to four-year university faculty, you see that even more and more and more. I'm here because I liked being in school and I was good at it. I can't teach as if everybody in my class likes being at school and is good at what I'm doing. And if I'm teaching that way, and then doing what a lot of my, people I know in the college, who just bemoan students these days, and oh, they just don't do the reading, and oh, they're just so lazy, and they don't turn stuff in on time and all that. That doesn't get us anywhere. It just leads to higher DFWI rates of the students who don't come from that same cookie cutter mold of the way things are done. I've been trying to improve and make my teaching not the way that I was taught before. In fact, the one mode of teaching I do not do, you did the introduction, the one mode of teaching I do not do anymore is this. This is actually very foreign to me because I don't do this anymore. I don't stand in front of a classroom and lecture because statistics and research has shown this works really well for the students who are highly engaged and very interested in the subject, and very poorly for everybody else. Versus if I was actually doing the active learning, going out there, we were talking and having a conversation through it, that can reach every student. So I'm going to close with, yesterday I was on a panel. We created something called the Weatherford College Learning Community, which you very nicely included in my introduction there. Of course, I know he did because I wrote the introduction, so that's how it goes. We were asked to write our introductions, so there you go. The Weatherford College Learning Community, we're a community of faculty members who are trying to improve teaching at Weatherford College. We have been reading books and having conversations on a monthly basis on how to improve what we do. And a lot of the stuff I've been talking about here is in the books that we are reading as well. A book that if you are currently teaching, or if you as a student are interested in teaching at some point in time, or are going to be in any sort of thing where you may have to go and present information to other people, the book I would recommend highly over anything else is a book called Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone. Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone. We read it. It was our second book that we read. And it goes into a lot of this, of how you reach all of your students, not just the students who look like you or look like what you think a typical student should look like. We have about 6 or 8 copies of it sitting over in the professional development section of the library that anybody, obviously student or faculty staff, can go and check out, because the books that we read in the Weatherford College Learning Community, the library buys and has on their shelves, so we have extra copies of them. Questions, comments, thoughts? Again, I've sat here and talked to you for 46 minutes. Yes?
So one of the things that I see as an instructor is, like you talked about due dates specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Like in some of my upper level Spanish courses, students have to submit long papers. And they have a long amount of time to prepare for those papers, and we do lots of things to get to that place. When it is tardy, that's a real conflict for me as an instructor, because there are jobs where if you miss a deadline, you are fired.
Yep.
And there are other jobs where you're not.
Yes.
So it kind of depends on where you're headed. But to me, that just kind of makes me just wonder, as academics, as instructors, yes, we do need to help. But I wonder, is this trickling up? Or is it not?
Yeah.
I don't know. Just a thought.
Yeah, we actually had this conversation in the Weatherford College Learning Community. We met on Tuesday, and we talked about due dates. I mean, that was one of the things we talked about, because it is it falls into this category of where you go with it, because you certainly don't want to say there are no due dates in a class, because then the real problem is that it encourages people to put everything off until the last minute. And most classes aren't set up for you to be able to do everything at the last minute. That's why there are due dates in a lot of cases. One of the things we've turned to in the social sciences department is doing a tremendous amount of scaffolding of assignments, meaning there's not just the final paper due at the end. You actually do the final paper in 4 pieces over the course of the semester. Any of those you're in my class now or in my class in previous, you've seen or taken any history or government, especially history class here at Weatherford College, we do the point where, you've got part 1 of the paper due about a quarter of the way through, part 2 halfway to, part 3 3/4 of the way through, and then the final paper is due at the end, so that you're working on it in pieces, because the old style model was definitely, here's the topic, the next thing I want to see from you, okay, I can go this far because I'm still going to carry it. The next thing I want to see from you is that paper at the end of the semester. That's the old style. That's the way I was, if I had a paper topic when I went through undergraduate, you got the topic at some point in time, and the next time that paper was even talked about was the day you turned it in. There wouldn't be anything in between. It was just, start, end. It's bringing this stuff in. So you can still have, I don't think there's a problem at all with having that due date, if you've made this, had the students do the steps along the way, so that they're not just everything is due at the end. I'm not saying you are or not doing that, but so it's not doing everything at the end. I personally have gotten more flexible on due dates over the years. I'm definitely much more flexible now than I used to be. Some of it is I don't like being a judge of what a legitimate excuse is and what's not a legitimate excuse. The old joke is everybody needs to watch out for their grandmothers because grandmothers die at test times, because students, But it's not a joke, because sometimes grandmothers die at test times. Sometimes it's the 8th grandmother that person has had who's died at test times. But you don't know. You can't just assume that it is either legitimate or not legitimate. And so, I have some blanket policies. One is, if you tell me ahead of time that you can't get it in on time, I'll take it late for a 20-point penalty. And it's just that. That's flat, If you tell me afterwards, then we're going to have a serious conversation, because, you just forgot about it is not as good for turning it in late. But you had something serious, legitimate happen, yeah, I'll work with you. I also turn to, I have, outside, the old model is the 3 big things. You have your midterm, your final, and your paper. That's your exam, it's your grade. If you fail one of those, you fail the class. My class has somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 120 different assignments, most of them very, very tiny. Every single one of those really tiny assignments, you can turn in late anytime for the entire semester for half credit. Half credit's not full credit, but it also means I don't have to, I'm not, especially on did you not get it's one response in on time, I don't even have to worry about it if you did not. And once it's been graded by me, it just says, turn in after this, 50% off. I've had students who, yes, they do turn all of them in the last week of class on that. It's fine. You decided that that's what you wanted to do, and you did it. But you're going to be at a disadvantage for a lot of other things if you put everything off until the last minute at 50% off. But you're also disadvantaged for your grade overall. So those are my thoughts on it. Other questions, thoughts, responses?
Just a comment. I just want to tell you I'm an advisor at Student Services,
yes.
And I just want to say that I commend you, because a lot of students that come in, they speak very highly of you. Okay, that's the first thing I want to say about that. Another thing is that I want to say is I see midterms coming in, and I'm checking, because if students come in for midterm, it's because they're either on academic probation or they want academic suspension, they're coming in. And I go in there, we go in there on their canvas, and I will specifically look at their grades, because I write down everything that I can from that student. Because I want to see what else can I do to be able to help them be a better student. The number, it's a few percentage. How much, I don't know. I'll know at the end when I finish my midterm, because I'm doing the tabulation. There are students that turn in things to the canvas and they don't have any grades.
Yep.
So how do we change that so students know exactly where they're at? Sometimes.
Well, remember I said, one of the things was early and often feedback. If you're, we as professors, we hate to be told, you need to get your grades back in a certain period of time. None of us like to say, you got to get it back in a week or in 48 hours or whatever it may be. But the longer we hold on to things, the less the students know how they're doing, what their chances of success are. And of course, if, as our assignments probably should be, if one assignment leads you to success on the next assignment, and they don't have feedback on the first assignment, how can they succeed at the next assignment?
Exactly.
And, I mean, all I can say is, there are 3 faculty and staff at Weatherford College here hearing me talk about this. So, I mean, I don't know what that says, but you can say what that, you can look and see what that says. I mean, and the Weatherford College Learning Community thing we did yesterday, the panel, there were about 4 or 5 faculty and about 30 students in it, you know, so we have a cultural problem at Weatherford College to a certain extent that there's not a huge amount of willingness. I mean, I even talked to a professor yesterday, and we'll have to leave this room so we don't holding it for the next group, but I talked to a professor yesterday and they said, well, what are you talking about? I said, well, I was talking about, oh, I don't go to those type of things. You know, I go to a content thing where they're talking about a specific subject. I don't go to ones that talk about teaching because we don't value it in a lot of ways. We don't value the improvement of it. And that last thing, and this is where I'll leave it, that last part, ways to support teachers and prepare them for the work of teaching. I'm not trying to badmouth Weatherford College anyway, but I will say Weatherford College is terrible at that. Your high school looks like that too?
Yeah.
Yes, that's my daughter, by the way. So, all right, well, thank you very much. We got to leave this room so the next group can come in, but thank you very much. If anybody would like these numbers, you just email me and I will send you a copy of this.